Pete, Dominic, it's Karen Madison. Congratulations on reaching 500 episodes. I mean, it's a perfect opportunity to crack a joke about how I haven't been on since 100, but I'm a part of the community which you so worked hard to build. This community has given me a lot. You gave me support and love unconditionally without ever having met me. So I am just so honored and proud of you and so happy to be a part of this community. I will continue to support the growth of your program, your podcast. Might be better when you add me on a little bit more than just my dating column, but that's neither here nor there. We probably don't need to discuss that right now. But I love you, Pete. Proud of what you do and looking forward to many more.
Stand up.
And now, Stand Up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, could my New Year's resolution include regular feedings for my captive pygmy tamarin? And with holiday parties continuing on amidst a raging pandemic, could we just cut the COVID talk and continue spicing up that eggnog? And now, the podcast host who is sweeping the nation with his head posing as a chicken egg, Pete Dominic!
Thank you, Pete Coe, and thank you to Karen Madison and everybody who has left voicemail messages for me. I'll keep playing them because folks seem to like them, and it's always great to hear from you. I love to share your voice with everybody else. And if you want to be a part of our community, then sign up now. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or just go to standupwithpete.com and find everything and everyone there. You can find us all. Okay, not all of us, but usually it's like 40 to 50 of us hanging out. Tonight, it is Thursday after all, and it's the Thursday night hangout. Yeah, 8 p.m. East. Hope to see you there. It's on Zoom, and it's always a lot of fun. We usually hang out for a couple, sometimes more, 3 hours. So hope to see you there. I've got an excellent guest joining me today. His name is Kristofer Goldsmith, and he is a Nazi hunter. He's a fascist hunter. He is an anti-fascist. He is a veteran of the Iraq War, where he served and deployed to Iraq and suffered from all kinds of, well, all of the maladies as a result, PTSD and moral injury and TBI, traumatic brain injury as well. Even tried to take his own life, which he talks about. Such an important conversation that we had. Very interesting and very important issue, though, because I've always enjoyed and learned a lot from talking to veterans. But this guy is now basically online hunting down and exposing the extremists who are terrorists and or about to be potentially from all of these right-wing, white supremacist, fascist groups. This guy and his organization and his fellow veterans are hunting them down online and exposing them. And it's amazing and important work that he's doing. Dude is hardcore, badass guy. Really enjoyed my conversation with him. And now that I think of it, I need to be giving someone credit. I'm pretty sure someone referred me, a listener, to Kristofer Goldsmith. If that was you, let me know, and I will definitely give you credit. Okay, so before I get to him, I want to get to the news. It's time for The Last 24. All right, guys. Well, the news continues to, in my opinion, get worse when it comes to COVID. I've got a lot of things to play for you and stories just to mention, just to try to keep you up to date on everything that I'm reading and seeing, headline-wise, soundbite-wise. Always want to hear from you. Let me know what you're seeing and hearing. You can always call the hotline, 209-STAND-UP, or email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. And actually, I prefer Twitter, so send me your DMs. It's always easiest for me to look up stories. All right, well, let's get to all things first related to COVID. Give me that sweet, sweet COVID jingle, Pete.
COVID news.
All right, well, we're all going to die. Thanks for listening to the show, and I'll talk to you tomorrow here on Stand Up. Now, the whole country is red, and the truth is, if you're vaccinated, you're not going to die, the odds are, and it's like the flu, and you can almost treat it like the flu if you've been vaccinated, but we can't all be vaccinated yet, obviously, and then there are millions of Americans who still refuse to and probably never will get vaccinated, which is why we find ourselves in the situation that we're in right now. And like I said, it's bad. It's everywhere. It's spreading faster than it's ever spread, but people aren't getting necessarily as ill. Headlines, COVID-related. Massachusetts to give schools 200,000 coronavirus testing kits for staffs so they can test for the virus before they return to work for the holidays. In Washington, D.C., they're going to require negative COVID-19 tests for all students and staffers returning to classrooms. That was announced yesterday by the mayor of D.C. Public Schools and D.C. Public Schools. The World Junior Hockey Championship has been canceled amid the COVID-19 surge. My heart goes out to this generation of athletes who are coming to their prime in the last 3 years and everybody else who is missing some of the prime athletic and performance events of their lives. It's just heartbreaking to watch. Speaking of performances, even the Joe Rogan, his sold out show has been rescheduled due to vaccine mandates. His Vancouver show has been canceled because on his podcast apparently speculated that he likely would be denied entry into Canada because he's not vaccinated against COVID-19. He said it doesn't make any sense for him to get vaccinated because he has natural immunity from a prior COVID-19 diagnosis in August. All right, here's another headline. It's Dr. Fauci saying that early data shows that the Omicron variant is not as severe as Delta for the vaccinated. He said that on Wednesday, citing international studies. Some initial data from U.S. hospitals said people who are vaccinated and boosted are also likely to be hospitalized. I got some clips from him in a moment, but two more. FDA authorized second at-home rapid COVID-19 test, signaling the potential for tens of millions of tests to be made available in the U.S. as shortages continue. And finally, Vermont is going to be providing free at-home COVID-19 tests to parents before students return to school there as well. So just a few states' guidelines here in the COVID news. And now let's listen to Dr. Fauci, who was on TV yesterday talking about guidance on New Year's Eve for New Year's Eve celebrations.
Similar to what I said for the Christmas holiday, it goes true here. If you are in a situation with a family setting in your home with family, parents, children, grandparents, and everyone is vaccinated and boosted, although the risk is never zero in anything, the risk is low enough that we feel you should continue to go through with those plans of having a home-related, vaccinated, boosted gathering with family and close friends who are also vaccinated and boosted. So it really depends on what your plans are. You said, should you change or cancel your plans? If your plans are to go to a 40 to 50 person New Year's Eve party with all the bells and whistles and everybody hugging and kissing and wishing each other a happy new year, I would strongly recommend that this year we do not do that.
All right, let's not do that. Are you going to a New Year's Eve party? Are you going to hang out with friends and family and a bunch of people? I don't do that on a normal year. Freaking hate New Year's Eve. I haven't seen midnight in a long time. I liked it to some extent when the girls, a few years when the girls are younger, but even when I was young and single, I didn't love it. I can't even stay up that late. Well, now I do with the podcast, but I'm just not a fan of New Year's Eve. I don't love crowds. It just seems too arbitrary. I make my New Year's resolutions and reset my goals and evaluate my life on my birthday in October, and I always make a big deal out of that for myself. So I'm not coming to your New Year's Eve party, and not that you invited me, and probably shouldn't invite anybody. I think that's the point of what Dr. Fauci is saying. Anyway, here he is now explaining kind of some of the guidelines and defending the new guidelines from the CDC. He's on CNBC here in this hit, but I think it sounds like he's in a public pool, an indoor public pool.
Sense of there are many other deleterious effects, health-wise effects, if society is crippled in the sense of being functioning to keeping critical things going. So in order to address that, they looked for a balance between what is safe and scientifically based and what could get us to keep society running. And it was felt that if you look at the likelihood of there being spread of infection from an infected person in the first 5 days is much, much more risky as you get into the second half of the 10-day period, day 6, 7, 8, 9. The chances of transmitting is very, very low. And for that reason, a decision was made to strike a balance. Keep people isolated for 5 days, and if they remain without symptoms, to go back to their normal function with the absolute requirement of wearing a mask at all times for those second 5 days of the 10-day framework.
All right, you got that loud and clear? Pretty straightforward, right? Well, here is the CDC's Rochelle Walensky. She was on CNN yesterday morning. Tough interview. Questions from Caitlin Collins. Here's just a small soundbite from that.
So from what you're saying, it sounds like this decision had just as much to do with business as it did with the science.
Well, so it really had a lot to do with what we thought people would be able to tolerate. We have seen relatively low rates of isolation for all of this pandemic. Some science has demonstrated less than a third of people are isolating when they need to. And so we really want to make sure that we had guidance in this moment where we were going to have a lot of disease that could be adhered to, that people were willing to adhere to, and that spoke specifically to when people were maximally infectious. So it really spoke to both behaviors as well as what people were able to do.
All right, I always love the way that Chris Hayes explains things, and I just want to take this short soundbite from the top of his show last night on MSNBC's All In as he explained with some context about where we're at, how we're living, what it all means.
Nearly 66% of the eligible population. That has transformed the risk level and experience of the pandemic for the vast majority of those people. And of course, there are still people, many people, millions, who are immunocompromised or who are otherwise vulnerable due to age or medical conditions. But for the people who don't fall into that category, and we're talking about, 150 million people, maybe or more, those people who are vaccinated, particularly those who are boosted, the risk, the personal risk of being exposed to this went from something that we hadn't really dealt with specifically like this before in our lifetimes. We hadn't quite had an illness this infectious and this possible to cause serious illness, to something that does look more like the flu. And the flu, of course, can still be dangerous, kills tens of thousands of Americans every year, but we don't orient our lives around the flu. So that's closer to the level of risk that, 200 million Americans or less than that are now dealing with. And then when you add in the sheer exhaustion many people feel, and I don't have to tell you this, I'm sure, because you're just feeling this yourself, many of you, with the lengths of this disruption in their lives, obviously the politics of the pandemic are just completely different than they were earlier in the pandemic.
Yes, he goes on to make a whole bunch of other points. That's at the top of All In on Chris Hayes, if you want to check that out. And one more clip that I definitely want to play for you. And this is like 4 minutes, but of course, the brilliant Laura Coates, my friend, anchoring on CNN last night, and she had probably one of the most respected epidemiologists in the country from the University of Minnesota, Michael Osterholm. And because my cousin Darcy is one of the smartest people I know, and she's a supporter and subscriber, and she says I have to play what he says, you get all 4 minutes. You can thank Darcy for this if you like this clip. And of course, thank Laura Coates and CNN for having Osterholm on, and Laura does a great job. Here, I think you're going to like this. He explains a lot. It's tough to take because of where we're supposed to be in the next 2 to 6 weeks, but here it is.
In terms of our intellectual discussions about whether it's this variant or that, it's important to know what the impact is. But in terms of what it really means, does it really have a difference or make one, depending on if it's the Delta that's hurting people or Omicron? For all intents and purposes, is it the same impact nonetheless?
No, not really, because in fact, imagine you have 1,000 cases with Delta. Mm-hmm. And in fact, of those cases, 100 will be severely ill. I have 1,000 cases of Omicron, but only 10 of them will be severely ill. That makes a big difference. Now, the problem is, what happens if it's not 1,000 cases of Omicron? It's 10,000 cases of Omicron because of the higher infectiousness. Suddenly, you're in the same soup that you were with Delta. So we're looking at this very carefully and trying to basically figure out what will be the contribution. In New York right now, where, all eyes in the country are focused on New York, which has become the epicenter of this current rollout of Omicron in the U.S. We're trying to figure out the rising hospital rates right now, which are occurring. And we want to know, is that Omicron or is that Delta? Because if that's Omicron, that's a bad sign about what could be happening, because at the same time, how many people are becoming infected. It's just going to be a matter of weeks before we have an entire viral blizzard across all of this country.
Now, you mentioned earlier the idea of drugs being on the way, medical opportunities and pills, et cetera, on the way to aid in the treatment of COVID-19. Tell me more about those.
Well, we have several drugs, most notably two that were licensed in the last 2 weeks. The one that I think most people are really most positive about is the Pfizer drug, that we think that if taken very early into the course of an illness, even with somebody who has underlying health conditions that could put them at risk for more serious illness, may very well reduce the likelihood of them having that serious illness. We also know that another drug that we've had for some time, remdesivir, now actually with more recent studies shows much more effect in also doing that same thing as the Pfizer drug does. Now, take that in combination, and we had more of it. We don't have much of either. We could actually really begin to turn this pandemic. And if I could use an example that for those of us that have been in the business for a long time, HIV used to be a fatal disease. Today, in many parts of the world where you have adequate drugs, people live long, healthy lives with HIV. So drugs can be very important. In this case, in the short term, we could possibly turn this pandemic into a much less serious event for people, even if they did get infected. We want to prevent infections in the first place. That's our first goal. But if you can't prevent them, these drugs could be real game changers going down the road.
A very important analogy to draw just now. Dr. Osterholm, I want to ask you finally, the CDC is now defending its decision to, amid a lot of the pushback it's getting, to cut isolation in half for those who are asymptomatic. But many are saying that it's politics that's driving the decision and maybe even a play for the midterms. Did they follow the science or are they following the elections? What do you say?
Well, let me just make it very clear. As someone who pushed hard on this administration over the course of the last 3 weeks to do what they've done, I'm basing it on science and the reality of what we're up against, not against any kind of political or economic issues. Right now, imagine hospitals. If you lose 20% of your workers because they have a mild illness for which they are going to be out 10 days, we will have hospital beds with critically ill patients sitting there without seeing anybody for 8-hour shifts. That would be tragedy. Wait till you can't get enough fire and police. Wait until you can't get enough of the infrastructure, critical people that we need. So what this was really an imperfect solution to a terribly imperfect problem. And so I commend them. I know I still would like to see the masking done differently. I would like to see testing done differently. But what they did is they bit the bullet, because the next 4 to 8 weeks are going to be unlike anything we've seen in this country. And when you have most of your people out sick, we're already seeing the big box retail stores beginning to close large establishments. They can't get enough people to come to work because so many are sick. That's what the CDC is trying to address. So they're not trying to lighten the time period of when you might be quarantined or isolated with more transmission. And many of the people who are critical of this, frankly, are people who come from what I consider the academic world, where the ideal is surely great. But as a former Secretary of the Defense once said, you don't get to go to war with what you want. You got to go to war with what you got.
Well, I'm still siding, I think, with Dr. Carroll, who is that academic probably he's talking about, but not necessarily that specific one, who is critical of the CDC. And I certainly don't love Osterholm's quoting of Donald Rumsfeld there at the end. But it's true. It is true. He's not wrong, I think, with that phrase. I just don't love that one at all because of what it brings up for me. But Osterholm, 4 to 8 weeks, he says. What are we going to do? What should we do? How are we gonna hunker down here? Are we gonna hunker down? Are you just gonna go out and try to get it? I'm so worried. Yesterday I was walking in the woods with Dr. Zatz, and he's supposed to be going on vacation like 8 days, and I just want him to be able to go on vacation and get there and get back, and I just want you to be able to live your life and have your plans play out the way that you want them. I mean, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just here in the shed. I think we're probably gonna have to cancel our shows. I mean, it's affecting everybody. And it's really frustrating that we've gotten this far, and you did the right thing, to say the least. You know, but this is a take no prisoners Omicron wave, and we've got to try to get through it by supporting each other, taking whatever precautions we can, and do everything we can to stop the spread. Get vaccinated, get our friends vaccinated, do what you can, get your kids boosted if possible. I'm doing that, so. I know you're probably frustrated and depressed and confused and concerned. Maybe you're not. Whatever your attitude is, I hope to see you tonight. We'll talk about it at our hangout. Commiserate as always. on the Discord platform if you'd like to chat there. There's always people there as well. All right. Well, that is all the sound bites I've got for you. Sorry, I may come up short on sound. I don't think it's a slow news week, but I didn't find a lot of great sound, at least today, and ran out of time. I did several interviews today, although Kristofer Goldsmith is the one I'm sharing with you, and that is coming up. But first, I've got the news, the rest of the news, the headlines, the non-COVID related stuff that you might have missed. It's time for the news dump and a brand new jingle by Pete Coe.
Philly airport screening bag security in a huff. There's a knife in the Vader teddy on today's news dump.
The Vader breathing. Oh my gosh. A New York woman is suspected after a pair of knives were found sewn into a stuffed animal her 9-year-old was traveling with, according to the TSA. The knives were found during a security screening at Philadelphia's International Airport. My Lord, why would you have knives hidden in your kid's teddy bear? Well, I'm not even going to try to get to the bottom of that one. Let's see what else is out there in the news for the news dump. A top German official said in an interview published Wednesday that Germany will likely miss carbon emission reduction targets next year. Earlier in the year, the German government set ambitious climate goals of being carbon neutral by 2045 after a court ruled that the government must strengthen its climate protection laws. Germany also set a goal of reducing emissions from transportation by 139 million tons, a 15% reduction from 1990. And aside from emissions reductions, they're also aiming to increase the number of wind turbines built each year to 1,000 to 1,500. And speaking of climate change, Alaska smashed a record for temperature, and they're bracing for biblical rains. That is the headline at thehill.com. In addition to setting a statewide record, Kodiak obliterated the daily record by 20 degrees. Alaska broke records the day after Christmas with its abnormally warm temperatures, and the temperature broke Alaska's December record by 9 degrees. It was 67 degrees at Kodiak Airport in Alaska the day after Christmas. Another day, another American terrorist attempt, a domestic terrorist attempt. An armed man with a hit list, including Joe Biden and Dr. Anthony Fauci, was arrested in Iowa on his way to the White House. According to the Los Angeles Times, the guy was taken into custody last week after allegedly telling police who pulled him over for driving aggressively he was on his way to the White House to kill the people in power. They said he had an AR-15 rifle, ammunition, body armor, and a grappling hook. A grappling hook? The hell does this guy think he's Hawkeye? The Batman? All right, I can't make jokes. There seems to be almost every day we're finding someone that was thinking about it, or getting closer and closer to the people that they are targeting, from Michigan to the White House and everywhere in between. Scary times for sure. Unless you're a retailer. Apparently, retailers opened more stores than they closed this year. How about that? Overall, 5,083 stores opened and 5,079 closed in 2021 through December 16th, according to NBC News. And stores like Walmart, Target, and Home Depot exceeded expected profits despite these supply chain concerns at limited inventory. And I talked about this at the beginning of December. Analysts were saying this was going to be the case. And despite high inflation rates, retail sales were on steady rise throughout the second half of 2021. And the markets are on fire as well. So how is the economy doing? How are you doing? And why is there so much fear-mongering about it? I think we know. All right, I haven't mentioned yet the news on Ghislaine Maxwell. You probably know all about it, right? Like, if this is a story that you're interested in, you probably have followed it, and there's probably not much I can add to it. But the longtime associate of serial sex offender Jeffrey Epstein found guilty on 5 of 6 counts related to the abuse and trafficking of underage girls. To me, one of the most important stories here is the journalism done by the Miami Herald reporter Julie Brown, and the credit that she should get for chasing this story down at high risk to herself and her career and threats. And I interviewed her back in Sirius, but a lot of people, talking about how important her work was to uncover and to stay on this horrible, horrible story, and some sense of justice, I suppose, being brought to the victims' families here. But I don't really have that much to say about it here. We could talk about it at the Hangout, and It's a terrible situation, and I'm glad that there's been some bit of closure brought to it, and I don't have much more to add on that. Oh, another COVID story. I missed one. The Westminster Kennel Club dog show has been postponed, as has the Vegas fireworks, though. They're going to go on. The Vegas fireworks show will go on. 300,000 people are expected there for New Year's amid concerns about the rapid spread of the Omicron variant of COVID-19. They're not canceling or scaling back their plans for their big New Year's gathering there. Good luck, Vegas. Thanks for playing your role, as always. No offense to Sheila and Cassie, who are listeners that live there and love it. I kid the Vegas folks and anybody else who lives there that I don't know or didn't mention. And finally today, this story is really prime for a news dump jingle, Pico. A squirrel that apparently terrorized a town in Wales has been put down. According to The Guardian, the animal dubbed Stripe, a nod to the creature of the same name in the movie Gremlins, has initially been fed by a 65-year-old local. But what began as a sweet thing in the summer took an ugly turn when Corrine Reynolds saying Stripe started biting her. She reported as much in a community Facebook group, and other alleged victims came out of the woodwork. In the space of 48 hours, this squirrel attacked 18 people. He started attacking people who were just taking their recycling bags to the bin, and they're quite gruesome injuries, apparently. Wales Online even resorting to calling the creature a psycho and showing pictures of the wounds. Well, they decided to get rid of the squirrel and obtained a humane trap to do so. And after handing the animal to the authorities, it was put down, with the group saying it was incredibly sad to do so. They were left with no choice due to changes in legislation that made it illegal to release gray squirrels back into the wild. So a big controversy in the UK over this sad story about the squirrel Stripe. Do something with that, Pete Co. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is today's news dump. And today's show is brought to you, of course, by over 800 paying subscribers. And I would love to have you join us. So please go to standupwithpete.com or just go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Become a subscriber, support the show, join our community. Hope to see you at the Hangout tonight. But the show this week is, and all month, also brought to you by GiveWell, which is an amazing nonprofit organization, and there's still time. I've been talking about it every day this week because it's the last week of the year, and I want to make sure that you don't forget to sign up for a donation, maybe even a recurring donation to GiveWell.org, because that's what I'll talk about next month, I think, and GiveWell.org/standup. Go learn more about it. I won't do the whole official spiel for you, but if you haven't visited, what are you waiting for? Tell me why. Reach out to me. If you're on the fence, call me. I'll talk you through it. Anybody that is thinking about making a donation, and if you haven't donated, they'll match it up to $250. So go now, GiveWell.org/standup, GiveWell.org/standup. And now it's time to get to my first and only guest on today's show. I actually interviewed several people today, but this is the one that I wanted to share with you. He is now the CEO of a veteran-owned open-source intelligence firm which specializes in the detection and disruption of today's greatest threats against democracy, disinformation campaigns, and domestic extremism. He's also the founder and president of an organization called High Ground Veterans Advocacy. It partners with military and veterans service organizations to train veterans to become grassroots advocates and leaders in their local communities. He was born in New York, joined the Army after the September 11th terrorist attacks. He deployed with Alpha Company of the 3rd Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2005, which was not the best time, of course, to be in Iraq. And after leaving the Army with a General Discharge after surviving a PTSD-related suicide attempt, he became an advocate for veterans with PTSD and those with less than honorable charges. From 2016 to 2020, he worked on the policy and government affairs team at Vietnam Veterans of America, where he did some really, really important work that we discussed. He also ended up going to Columbia University, where he got a bachelor's degree in political science. Smart dude who has seen quite an interesting life, and now he is running Sparvarius, this veteran-owned open-source intelligence firm, and he hunts fascists and Nazis every day. And it's a fascinating story. The first half, it's about him and his service and what he experienced, and really helped me understand some specifics of what a lot of veterans go through that I didn't understand. I'm always looking to learn. And then the second half of our conversation gets crazy when he starts talking about what he is doing, what he is working on right now, and going after these crazy white supremacists and Nazis and extremists, wherever they are online, and sabotaging their plans. Amazing dude. Really psyched to talk to him for the first time. I now introduce you to Kristofer Goldsmith, who you can follow on Twitter, by the way, at Kris Goldsmith 85. Actually, at KRIS Goldsmith 85 on Twitter, Sparvarius.co, and you can find out more on all the links in the show notes. Here we go. Okay, Kristofer Goldsmith, first time on the show, and I'm really excited to have you joining me. You're doing amazing work, and I'm psyched to have you here to talk about your work and your life. Welcome to the show, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Pete. It's great to be here.
So let's just talk a little about you before we get to the work you're doing, because I think they're both pretty fascinating and important to each other. But what was your childhood like, and what led you to joining the military when you did?
Sure. So I grew up in Long Island. I was one of those kids who kind of like idolized people in the military. I feel like a lot of little boys grow up and like for Halloween, they get a cop's uniform or a firefighter or whatever. In my case, it was an army man, and I basically just never grew out of that. Right. Like, I had parents can't get the kids out of the Halloween costume. Well, I just wore camouflage. Like,
what was there?
High school.
I don't know how old you are. I feel like you're younger than me. But was there a show or a toy or a genre that you really loved?
One of my earliest memories is of Desert Storm coming to an end and like the parades. I remember like a big yellow ribbon around my grandma's tree out front. And then the next thing I know, there's a giant parade and there's tanks and all sorts of stuff. I was, I guess, about 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
But it was every veteran in my family was a veteran of the good war, right? Of World War II. So they all had their great stories. They were all heroes and shit. I never met a Vietnam vet, like for real, and talked to a Vietnam vet, which might have given me a totally different perspective on what military service, might be like after, leaving Germany.
Oh, that's interesting. So like the influence was less, I just made an assumption. It was maybe less about kind of film or TV or toys, and more about like the actual people in your family who had served and who you looked up to based on, their stories or even who they were.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up wanting to fight the Russians and the Nazis and all that stuff. And like, once I grew up, I realized, oh, all right, they're not a problem. And then suddenly, I get out of the military and the Russians and the Nazis are a problem again. So
I was about to, I'm so glad I didn't interrupt you. I was like, well, I think you are currently fighting them.
Yeah.
So how old were you? How was your childhood? Anything else you could tell me about growing up in Long Island in the, 90s?
Yeah. So I grew up in the 90s, graduated high school in 2003. So when I was 16, that's when September 11th happened. And, being, I guess, 20 miles out of Manhattan, I didn't personally lose anybody in the towers, but it seemed like quite literally everyone I knew, every family member, every friend had someone who they directly lost. Right. So though I wanted to serve in the military my entire life, once September 11th happened, that's when you add in the anger and the desire for revenge. Right. And that's the desire to kill for your country and the desire to serve your country are two separate things. And that desire to kill for your country kind of thing, that came in my teens on September 11th. So I joined the Army in 2004, like 6 months after I graduated high school, looking to fight. There was a war when I joined. There were two wars when I joined.
How'd your parents feel about you signing up for the Army at that time?
Never had a really close relationship with my dad. Never had like those heart-to-heart types of talks. And when they knew that I wanted to join the military my entire life, that I had no desire to go to college or anything like that. And when I told my dad that I was going to join the military, he just says to me, he's like, listen, I know I can't talk you out of it. I just want you to do one thing. Don't join the Marines. And that from there, he told me he was a little too young for Vietnam, and told me about how those of his friends who used to hang out with older guys, those who went to Vietnam were Marines, either didn't come back or came back all sorts of fucked up.
Yeah.
So in his mind, the Army was a safe bet.
It's so weird that I'm sure a lot of parents say that. And what's crazy is I literally said it last night to my daughters and their friends, because their friend was talking about how she's going to pay for college going through ROTC. Mm-hmm. And I said, how do your parents feel about that? She's like, they don't love it, but it's up to me. And it'd be Air Force. And I said, as long as it's not the Marines, it's not, you can deploy, I think, in the Air Force, like wherever you want, you can choose. So like I said the same thing. And, I guess I don't want to disrespect the Marine Corps, but why you're joining the Marines, and anybody who has any respect for the Marines knows what Marines do. I mean, they have one job. Isn't it pretty straightforward?
I mean, the Marine Corps has support MOSs the same way that any other branch does. But
what's MOS again?
Military Occupational Specialty. So what most people think of when they think Marines, they think infantry. Well, I was in the Army. I was a forward observer in an infantry battalion. So my job was, if you ever watch like a Tom Hanks war movie, like even whether it's Saving Private Ryan or Forrest Gump, you're going to see some point when a bunch of guys are like walking through the woods or the jungle or up a mountain, and all of a sudden, machine gun fire comes at them and everybody hits the ground. And then, the camera cuts to a nerdy guy with glasses yelling into a microphone, and all of a sudden things start blowing up. I was the nerdy guy with the glasses. So, I ran with the infantry. The only difference was it was my job to keep them safe by blowing shit up. If anything like that happened.
Did that happen?
So I was deployed to Sadr City, Baghdad, which was extremely densely populated. So the first thing they did when I got there was they took away my assets, meaning I couldn't do my job, which was it shaped my entire deployment. They looked at me and they were like, the kid with the high test scores in an infantry unit, he can't do the artillery work, can't blow stuff up. So we got to make use of his brains. So they gave me a camera, a notepad, a GPS, and basically made me an on-the-ground intelligence reporter. So still running with the infantry, but instead of carrying a radio, I'm basically documenting everything that the infantry company is doing. So,
wow.
Whereas that might sound like not that bad, like not a combat job. It is a combat job. I mean, I was in combat. I was still carrying my rifle, my ammo, my grenades.
Oh, it sounds like a combat job.
Yeah.
I mean, I know just enough to know that's. I mean, I want to know more about what that job was. But let me just take one step back. So you join the Army and you go through basic training, and how was that whole experience? Was it what you thought it would be? Was it satisfying, rewarding, challenging? Did you like?
So basic training for me was, I had a lot of fun. I had a blast, but it was not nearly as challenging as everyone made it out to be. So frankly, I was a little disappointed, but I did have like the time of my life. You're going out and you're playing G.I. Joe for 4 months. That's, not that bad.
It sounds awesome. I mean, the training, I wish I had done it in another life, in a multiverse, where there wasn't war.
That's the way to do it. Live vicariously through somebody else.
Well, I mean, if you take out the real life consequences of what you're actually training to do, that's camp. Yeah. They should have combat camp where you're not being sent off to war. There's no live rounds, but this is what it's like. And I think they do have it. I think that's actually who you're tracking. So we'll get into that.
That is, yeah.
It's a part of it, right? Like
that's my new job.
It's a natural part of, I suppose, the desire to be part of a group of people of any sort, whether you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, golfing, or you're a militia group whose ideology is whatever it is. So
yeah.
So you were in Iraq at one of the worst times in terms of the violence. I think I read 2005. Yeah. I mean, what was your how long were you in Iraq, and what did you experience? Because I want to certainly talk about, what happened after that.
So I was in Iraq for a year, January through December of 2005. I was 19 years old when I deployed. And my job was, as I told you, kind of like the on the ground intelligence reporter. So what that meant was, same as everybody else, a whole lot of boring, just a whole lot of waiting for something to happen. Then occasionally people shoot at you, people try to blow you up. Most of the time you have no idea who it is, or, and you can't shoot back because there's a higher chance of you killing an innocent person than a bad guy, which is a bit of a mind fuck that messes you up pretty bad when you can't shoot back. But at the age of 19, it was also my job to photo document mass graves, which was like not something that a lot of 19-year-olds, I think, are prepared for.
Just your word got eaten right there. Just for 1 second, the word second, mass graves.
Yeah, mass graves. So, they're more often than not, it was just onesies and twosies of Iraqis who were murdered. We never would find out why. Most of the time, we didn't know who they were, who the victim was, anything like that. And at 19 years old, it was my job to play, CSI Iraq and try and solve the mystery of all the murders, which I can tell you I was not able to do, which, again, is kind of a mindfuck, being responsible for that kind of thing.
All right, hold on. So I've got two mindfucks, which are both super important. And I think it's an interesting way of talking about what that leads to. Mm-hmm. These moments and these experiences that you have while you're deployed in combat zones and what they lead to. And I think it's still, as much as I've interviewed veterans, become really good friends with men and women who've served, and including those who have dealt with severe psychological issues as a result, I still struggle trying to understand exactly why the experiences lead to the thoughts. And I realize that it's, one thing is not monolithic, right? It's different for different people. Yeah. But the fact that people end up in a similar place and too often suicidal the way that you did, I still think it's so important that we talk about the mind fucks, as you're calling them, because that's what the reality of it was. So maybe give me another couple of those, if you want, about how your service really affected you and others.
Yeah. So when I was serving, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I apologize if you can hear the door.
Yeah, you're being attacked. Well, we can.
Yeah.
What do you got there? What are you working with?
Somebody's at the door. So
okay, do you want to go check? I can pause.
Yeah, just give me 1 minute.
No problem. No problem.
All right, I'm going to get interrupted in another minute or two, but I'm back for now. So I was saying when I was serving in Iraq in 2005. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, was not part of the American lexicon. I literally didn't know what the acronym PTSD stood for at the time, right? And now it is. But, part of the problem with the all-volunteer force, with a lot of Americans not being directly connected with those who've served in the most recent wars, is veterans are constantly stuck educating not just each other and ourselves, like understanding what we went through and how it affected us, but teaching our friends and family, that there's a difference between PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and traumatic brain injury, which is, a literal thing, traumatic brain injury, right?
Your brain shaking inside your skull. It's an actual physical, but you can't see it. So
correct. And then there's moral injury.
Right.
And moral injury is I think the newest one to the American lexicon. It's not a new concept. It's not a new diagnosis or anything like that. It's just a new idea in the mind of the public. And I experienced two out of those three. I was, I was rocked around a little in Iraq, but never to the point where I was knocked unconscious or anything like that. So my traumatic brain injury came from PTSD, me getting in, brawls and having my face broken in a bar a couple years after I came home, right? So now I've got all three to deal with. But post-traumatic stress disorder typically comes from a singular event. like one point of stress where you either experience something that makes you feel incredibly unsafe. That could be watching your buddies die. It could be, showing up at a mass grave and not knowing who killed them, how they were killed, and not knowing if a sniper is off in the distance watching you. Moral injury is showing up at that mass grave and being the 19-year-old kid who's got to take close-up photos of mutilated faces, victims of torture, and then you're in charge of solving the murder mystery, and you don't. So, thankfully, I've got access to the VA, and shortly after getting kicked out of the Army, which we'll just talk about in a bit, my mom forced me to go to the VA and start getting care, and I've been able to process a lot of the worst stuff that I've been through, and it took a long time. It took like 5 years of being in a really dark place, but I finally was able to start moving forward in my life.
Talk to me more about examples of moral injury.
So I think the most, if not most common, the most commonly talked about moral injury are seeing kids get hurt or seeing kids killed. One of my best friends, a co-founder of High Ground Veterans Advocacy, the nonprofit that I started, guy Thomas Burke. He was a Marine. He deployed to both Iraq and Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, the guy's now a pastor, by the way, so I can give you a sense of that. He was an infantryman, became a pastor. And he went to Yale Divinity School. So he's a super smart guy. He, when he was in Afghanistan, made friends with a bunch of little kids, handing out soccer balls, handing out candies, that kind of thing. And you're not making friends with kids just for the fuck of it. It's your job, to represent the United States, to win hearts and minds, right? That's the phrase that they used to beat into our heads all the time. Mm-hmm. It's also because, most people don't want to hurt kids, and you want to keep kids safe. They don't have to be yours, or they don't have to be white kids or kids in the US, right? So Thomas befriends a bunch of kids, and then they all got blown up. And the next day he's walking around with a trash bag, picking up arms and legs and throwing kids' body parts in a trash bag. And that's another guy who, suffered from severe moral injury and post-traumatic stress disorder, and ended up getting kicked out of the Marine Corps for self-medicating with pot.
Ah, what a waste.
Yep. So.
Yeah, that's quite that is a very specific and understandable example of how moral injury, probably led him to on the journey. You should send him over. I'd love to talk to him as well. So what happened, during your year? I mean, and after, and how did you end up getting the boot?
So most of the year was boring. If you watch the movie Jarhead, that's the most realistic wartime movie.
Oh yeah, okay.
It's standing around bored, praying for something to happen, right. Like wanting to get in a gunfight because at least you're doing something that you were sent there for, right? But the reality is, it's a year of walking through sewage and breathing in burnt trash, and walking around dead people and dead animals, and getting that smell in your system. People occasionally try to blow you up and shoot at you. You have no idea why or where they're coming from or who they are. Very often you're not catching the bad guys. I spent 11 months over there before I went home on leave. I went home on leave for 2 weeks and then came back to Iraq for 2 weeks and then went back home for good. Being the youngest guy in the unit, I didn't have any, I didn't have a wife. I didn't have any kids. So I ended up just trading my leave dates with people who needed it. And eventually they forced me to go home, which I didn't even want to, because statistically you're more likely to get hurt or die, within a couple of days of your leave dates. So I was like, I don't want to be a statistic. I'd rather just stay here.
Really? Wow. I didn't know that. I wonder why that is.
Well, you start to, when you're close to home or you just come back, your brain is at home. You're not there. You're distracted.
Oh, that's interesting. So then you take your leave at the very end of your deployment and you go back to Iraq and then go home for good. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Yeah. And in between them, which is a whole other story, I escorted my buddy to jail in Kuwait, which was a fun adventure.
Why?
So there was this klepto kid, and I used the word kid because he turned 18 while we were already deployed. You can join the Army at 17. At 18, you can deploy. So on his 18th birthday, they put him on a plane and he came over. So though we were all kids, 18, 19 years old, he's the baby. And his way of like making friends was to steal shit and brag about it. So one day he stole a bunch of marked dollar bills from our interpreters. And then him and my genius roommate went to the PX, the store on base, the military like run store. And then they attempted to launder the money, $20 bills, by buying candy bars. So they had them, the marked bills showed up in the system like right away. And they had video of the two idiots just getting in line buying Snickers.
Sounds like a tough investigation to conduct.
So I got to bring my best friend to jail. And there are priorities for flights. And at this time in Iraq, it's really ugly. So most of the flights in and out of Iraq and Kuwait were reserved for replacement forces, people going home on emergency leave, and those who are going to Germany because they're being medevaced. So being low on the priority list of bringing my best friend to jail, we actually sat around for the last couple days of my deployment, like just shooting the shit. Because he's a prisoner, he's wearing like t-shirt and shorts while I'm standing there, still in armor, carrying my rifle and shit. So it was a lot of him just laughing at me.
This was like, a U.S. military facility in Kuwait where you went if you committed such a crime while being deployed, I guess, in Iraq. That's where they sent you.
Yeah. Huh. So he spent a couple of weeks in Kuwait working out and reading books.
Oh, God. Oh, wow.
Getting in great shape. And then we all went home the same time.
If you didn't want to be there, or if you didn't want to be, doing what you're doing, I guess that's one way out. Not that was his intention, but wow. So then what happens?
He ended up pretty lucky. He got to go home the same plane and everything. Like he did his time, got on the plane, went home with us, and that was his second deployment. He also had participated in the invasion. So they figured, all right, this is the one big mistake you've ever made. We'll just, let you go on your way. And, good luck in life. Just stay the fuck out of here. So
where did you go wrong?
So I went wrong in being fucking goody two shoes. I was a Boy Scout. I was well liked. I was popular. I performed well on any test that was ever put in front of me. I was a cross-country runner in high school. So when I joined the Army and they're like, all right, you got to run fast. I ran faster than everybody. And that made me, it's stupid, but that's how they measure your abilities.
Sure.
Being 130 pounds and able to run fast is not necessarily helpful when you're weighed down by armor and shit.
Right.
So yeah, I was promoted ahead of my peers, made sergeant in just over 2 years. But I didn't want to re-enlist. I fucking hated my life in the military. It sounds cliche, but it's true. My childhood dream turned into a living nightmare, one that I felt like I couldn't escape from. And it turns out I actually couldn't. In January of 2007, I had 4 months left of my contract. And President Bush at the time announced the troop surge during the State of the Union, which meant that my unit received stop-loss orders. Ooh. So it doesn't matter what your orders or your contract says. Doesn't matter if you've been accepted to school like I was, if you had, made plans to get an apartment back at home. If your orders were within a 90-day window of that deployment date, they threw those orders out and said, you're deploying with the unit. So my 3.5-year enlistment ended up getting extended by 2 years, like 3 months out, like just before I was ready to get out and be a civilian again. So I had come home from Iraq really rough around the edges, worse for wear. with what I now understand to be severe post-traumatic stress disorder. But I was 20 when I got home from Iraq, turned 21, 6 months later. I didn't know what the hell PTSD was.
Right.
For me, all of us are our view of the world. It's our perspective, right? And when you're young and you have a relatively narrow view on what the world is like, being in the military, you're told what to do, when to do it, where to be at all fucking times. You don't know what's really going on in the world. That was before Facebook and all this stuff, right? So there's no keeping up with your friends, no keeping up with the family. So your world was small. What I thought was normal, drinking until I threw up, waking up in a shower that's scalding hot after drinking too much, getting in fights, like really nasty fights, thinking I'm killing people, like being in a fight, winning and thinking, oh my God, I just killed someone. That's not normal. But when you're in an infantry unit and everybody went through the same shit and we're all doing the same shit, that's normal, because everyone's going through the same thing, right? So the difference between me and a lot of other guys is I never got caught for any of that stuff. I never got in trouble. I would drink my face off, but I always showed up to work on time. I always, my uniform was always straight. I always ran fast, did the push-ups, the sit-ups, when I had the opportunity to do the job I was supposed to, blow stuff up, like I was really good at it. Other guys, you do the same kind of thing, except you have a car and you get a DUI and now your life is over, right? Like you go to jail, you get kicked out of the military, you get court-martialed, all that shit, right? So I was a golden boy. And despite my symptoms, I never getting in trouble. No one knew what I was going through. And they just thought, oh, that's, he's the kid from New York. He's a fucking asshole. He talks fast. He's a smart ass. They thought it was part of my personality to be super fucking abrasive, which, it was, but not like getting in fights and choking people out kind of abrasive, right? So once those stop loss orders came down, so just a year after I'd been home, 3 or 4 months before I was supposed to get out, that's when all of a sudden the straw broke the camel's back. That's when I started having panic attacks. And, we're adults. We know what a panic attack is. Our friend, if you haven't had a panic attack, I'm sure you know a friend who's had it and they've described it to you, right? I was 21 years old when I had my first panic attack. I thought I was dying. I had no reference point for what I was experiencing. So I'm 21 years old, feeling like my chest is caving in on itself. I can't breathe. My heart, the heart muscle, it feels like it hurts, right? So I go to the hospital on base, and they give me an EKG. They, check my lungs and everything. They give me an X-ray, and they tell me, they're like, listen, kid, you're like one of the most healthy kids we've ever seen here. Do you think you might be stressed out? And I was like, well, let me tell you a fucking story, guy. So I had been looking up to that point for a way to get help. The medics, the commanders, they used to give these briefings, and they would literally point across the street from where we worked. And they'd say, see that? It says behavioral health. If you're feeling any problems, you go over there and, you see a doctor and you're fine. Well, I went over to those trailers because I was stationed in Georgia, and everything's a fucking trailer park, including the Army. And it looks like a scene out of The Walking Dead, like knocked over chairs and desks and like shit on the walls and papers everywhere. Turned out they had moved the the behavioral health clinic, but they didn't take down any of the signs. So I didn't know how to get help for months while I was looking for it, until I ended up having the panic attack, thinking I'm dying. And then in the ER, they're like, all right, well, why don't you walk down the hallway? It's right here. And before, so that was like January of 2007. I think I saw a psychiatrist twice, one-on-one, before I was supposed to deploy in May. Otherwise, the only mental health care, using the air quotes, that I was able to get were these 2-hour-long sessions where the doctor her name was Colonel Anna Perotti. I'll never forget this woman. She'd come into a 2-hour session an hour late, She's in uniform. She's a colonel. She's an officer. I'm a sergeant. I'm a young enlisted guy. And I'm sitting in a room, tiny room in sweltering hot Georgia, filled with people. And it's not just, enlisted male soldiers like me. It's women in the military. It's women civilians. So dependents who live on base, daughters, wives. And it's, colonels, like all sorts of different people. Not everybody has combat related PTSD. They all just have problems. There were women who were in there who were victims of sexual assault, surrounded by people who probably looked like, the perpetrator, right?
Jeez. Yeah.
And we had all of us, there'd be like 20 of us, would have an hour to compete for time to basically just try and get meds out of a woman to dull the pain.
Right. Oh my God.
So that was my mental health care leading up to a suicide attempt. Now, I had told the military, I had told that doctor, I had told another doctor that I had suicidal thoughts. And because I had previously cleared the physical to deploy, there was no going back. There was no, like, I'm reporting new symptoms, I'm having panic attacks. They're like, well, that doesn't matter because you cleared the physical. So medically, you're okay to deploy. Didn't matter what was going on, what the reality was. They're like, well, we checked this magic box, so you're going overseas. So the night before what was supposed to be my second deployment, the surprise deployment, after I had, experienced the backdoor draft, I attempted to take my own life. And thankfully, my roommate at the time, he didn't know what PTSD was either. Like, he was another guy who couldn't get care, even though he desperately needed it, but he knew what the signs of suicide were. And he saved my life, calling the cops. They found me, dragged me into the hospital. My first memory was being handcuffed to a gurney, fighting with the cops. And then I ended up on a mental health ward for, I don't even remember how long. It was something like 2 weeks. And I got to say, that was the most terrifying experience up to that point in my life. Worse than anything I experienced in Iraq. Because when I was on that mental health ward, they had me by the balls. And they were telling me, that same colonel who I had reported being suicidal to months before my suicide attempt, they told me, well, if you're not feeling better, if you're still depressed, if you're still suicidal, we'll just keep you up here indefinitely. And when they said that word indefinitely, my mind latched onto it as if it was literal. And frankly, like, there's might as well have been literal.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I'm fine. The suicide attempt was a mistake. It was a fleeting thought. I'm all better now. So in an attempt to, and by the way, I should mention, when you're on a mental health ward involuntarily up there, you have no rights, especially if you're in the military and your doctor is an officer in charge of you, right? Not directly in your chain of command, but they're your boss, essentially, and they're representatives of the Army, which has put you in that circumstance. So I went through all that, and they tell me, they're like, listen, we understand you got fucked here. Like, the whole stop loss thing was pretty bad. Like, it's just a numbers game. Statistically, you ended up, losing Russian roulette when it comes to deployment schedules. And they told me, all right, we're going to, give you an honorable discharge and you go on your way. And I'm like, thank fucking God. Like, I need to get the fuck out of here because I'm clearly not getting the help I need. A little bit of silence goes on, for a couple of weeks. I don't get any orders, don't hear any word. They're basically just putting me on suicide watch. Next thing I know, I get what's called a counseling statement. It's like getting written up at work if you work at fucking McDonald's. So it's like a low level kind of discipline thing. And it's for missing movement, meaning not getting on the plane at the prescribed time. And 2 is for malingering, which is a medical diagnosis, which I didn't understand because I'm fucking 21 and I'm all fucked up in the head and, am lucky that I'm still alive. And those 2 pieces of paper, like a McDonald's manager writing up a cashier, was all it took to kick me out of the Army with the General Discharge, which meant that I had no more GI Bill. So my one prospect of moving on with my life was taken away from me. And my military history, which up until the suicide attempt was spectacular, suddenly looked like a criminal background. And then the economy collapsed, 2007, 2008, right? So I ended up unemployable because of the type of discharge, couldn't collect unemployment benefits. Going from Sergeant Goldsmith, well-liked, in charge of a dozen lives, keeping people safe, training them for combat, personally signed for millions of dollars worth of equipment, radios, and a Bradley, and with the responsibility of calling for fire, meaning calling in mortar strikes, artillery strikes, with a kill radius of a football field wide. Take a football field long and draw a circle, right? And all of a sudden, I'm Kris Goldsmith, living in his childhood bedroom, working for his younger sister at the pizza place. Same place that I was washing dishes when I was in ninth grade.
Which is a metaphor, or not a metaphor. It's like I'm back to where I was before I accomplished everything that you just listed, before I had all the responsibilities and promotions. So what is that? I think you're probably about to tell me, but what does that do to you? I
was broken. I was completely broken. I mentioned before, like, some of the symptoms that I was experiencing when I still lived in the barracks before I was a sergeant, like when I was fresh home to Georgia, where I was stationed after coming home from Iraq. That mass grave, May 15th, 2005, was the day I was photographing it. May 15th is pretty close to the summer solstice. So it's when you're standing outside and the only shadow is directly below your feet, right? It's so hot that you can't touch your weapon. Your M4 is M16, whatever, is black. You literally can't touch it because the sun is so hot, and it's like 120 degrees. So those bodies were buried in a dump. There were dead animals there. There were dogs trying to eat the people, the bodies. So we had to keep scaring the dogs away. And it was a trash dump where there's a low point by the city, which their sewage system was fucked up, and all the sewage just flowed into it, right? So the smell was indescribable, and it was stuck not in my nose, but in my mind. But I didn't know that. I just smelled it everywhere, all day, every day. So when I came home from Iraq, I would get shit-faced drinking vodka because it was the closest thing to rubbing alcohol, and Everclear, it was the closest thing to rubbing alcohol, right? And I used to just drink it straight out of the bottle and then get in a super hot shower, completely blackout drunk, trying to get the smell out of my system. And it never worked, right? So that was me at 20 years old. And a year after that, a year and a half out of that, I'm kicked out of the military, living in my childhood bedroom, right? I keep using the phrase, sounds cliche, but my childhood dream was the worst fucking nightmare, and it was inescapable. Getting out of the military didn't solve any of the problems that I was dealing with. So I spent about 5 years drunk as shit, getting in fights, relationships with everyone, my family, my friends, women, were terrible and toxic because I didn't know how to be human anymore. And I'm lucky that I had access to the VA. When I got kicked out of the military, I got what's called a General Discharge, which is in between honorable and other than honorable. Other than honorable, or OTH discharges, people get kicked out, like my friend Thomas Burke, the Marine who was picking up his, little kids' body parts.
Children.
He got an OTH. People with OTHs don't even qualify, or didn't at this time, didn't even qualify for VA healthcare at all. Didn't matter if they had gone through war 1 or 2 times, done and seen all these things. Most people who get kicked out of the military didn't have access to the VA. And part of what saved my life is I found advocacy. I found these injustices. I experienced these injustices. And when I started doing research for my own case to appeal for a discharge upgrade, I discovered that what I had experienced was not anomalous. There were actually 500,000 veterans in this country today with other non-honorable discharges, meaning worse than me, who don't have access to VA healthcare. So I spent the rest of my adult life, doing the research, showing that this is indeed a problem, and then telling the story of personally the way that it impacted me as a human being, face to face with a member of Congress. And since then, I've been able to get some laws passed and solve some of these problems. It's a slow moving thing, but, we have seen secretaries of VA not want to talk about veterans with bad paper discharges to actively trying to get them into VA hospitals, which is, 10 years ago, I didn't know if that was even possible.
I have like 8,000 questions, but I want to talk about the work you're doing. And I almost want to say, maybe we should do a part 2 because I've taken up so much of your time. But we
can do that, man.
I do want to get to, if we could just touch on it real quick. But there's just one thing I can't not say, which is kind of I don't know what you did wrong to be discharged the way that you were and to lose all of your benefits. Like, what was it that they told you? Why were you punished?
They wanted to so what they did to me was illegal, but there's no paper trail, so I can't prove it. There is no justice, right? So this happens to people all the time, and especially women who are victims of sexual assault in the military get kicked out like this all the time. And it's to make an example of them. It's to disincentivize complaining and getting help. Because at the end of the day, in the line units, whether it's in infantry unit or you're in supply or intelligence, the military is run by very young people who don't have a lot of life experience. And some of them hate their own fucking lives and they take it out on people who they have power over. So at the end of the day, I was a 21-year-old whose life was being irreparably damaged by a couple people in their mid-20s to late 20s who had known nothing of being an adult outside of being in the uniform in the military, which is, I know a lot of vets might get upset when they hear this, but if you've spent your entire adult life in the military, you don't know shit about the real world. You don't know shit about real people. And the people who were in charge of me saw me as a weak link, as someone who needed to be made an example of. And rather than, the treatment history, the medication, the diagnoses that I had already had before my suicide attempt, none of that mattered to them. All that they cared about was the idea that, oh, well, if, we give him an honorable discharge, then, we'll have a whole platoon of guys pretend, again, using air quotes, pretend to try to kill themselves to get out of the military. So the only rational thing in their fucking minds was to punish me for it. And, the criminal thing about the way the military justice system is you can fuck someone over. You can ruin their life. You can lead them to suicide, which is why we have suicide problems. It's not all combat related. Most people who die by suicide have never seen combat. We have toxic military leaders, not just at the upper echelon, but at the lowest level, who have or are totally devoid of empathy, humanity, sympathy, and understanding. And I'm lucky. Yes, I attempted suicide, but I'm a pretty fucking resilient person. There are a lot of folks who've gone through shit like me, and if they didn't die by suicide on their first attempt, they're dead now. And there's no justice. There's no, taking that captain who illegally mandated while he's overseas and no longer in my chain of command that I was punished. There's no finding justice for Captain Eric Mello, who's 15 years later, his fucking Facebook profile is still him in uniform because he's a fucking loser.
Are you allowed to say those people's names?
Yeah. They want to take me to court now? Okay, sure.
I mean, I don't know. It's on my podcast. I don't want you to get in trouble. They're not gonna, no one's going
to. I'm literally writing a book about this shit.
Oh, good.
So.
Well, I mean, based on our conversation today, I can't wait to read every word of it because, just I mean, taking some of the common issues, especially that men are dealing with aside, you just touched on this, but like I've done I've covered a lot the sexual assault in the military and heard those stories. And so you're talking about men, it's almost entirely men, from the top to the bottom in terms of their ranking. Horrible things. I mean, rape and horrible assaults constantly, and then just being hidden and obfuscated. And it has been, I think they call it, like, smart people, even in the military, call it an epidemic. It's not like a few bad apples. Like it's institutionalized, it would seem. And that's hard. That's just horrific. And that's why I always get irked at giving respect for people just because they wear a uniform. I'm like, hold on a second.
Not everybody who served is a good person.
So the work that you're doing now, it's hard to make a pivot based on everything that you just said. And we can come back and talk about it anytime that you want, because I think it's super important and clearly you've got a lot to say. But now the work that you're doing is you really are hunting fascists, Nazis, and extremists. You mentioned the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center, both of which I've been familiar with and taught to folks there. You're doing something different, and you're doing it with, obviously, your background. What is Sparvarius' mission? Did I say it right?
Yeah, you got it. So Sparvarius, the difference between us and the ADLs and the SPLCs of the world, who I have tremendous respect for and I work for, is we're an entirely veteran brand. I am currently working with Veterans for American Ideals, which is a project of Human Rights First, to do a pilot program to create a cadre of veterans who do what I do, which is not just study the far right, but infiltrate the organizations and sabotage them. So, and to be clear, I'm not telling people to go join their militia in their neighborhood and show up with a gun to their range day or whatever. Most of what I do is completely online, and frankly, it's easy because we're not dealing with geniuses for the most part.
Can you give me a typical case or an experience that you've had and how you go about doing it?
So how I got into hunting Nazis. So my background between the military and what I'm doing now, I was a veteran advocate working in DC, working for Vietnam Veterans America, getting laws passed. Like, I invented the forever part of the forever GI Bill. So now when people join the military, there's no more 15 years and it expires. They can join the military, serve, get out, and then use the GI Bill when they're in their 80s.
Wow.
Just to pay, just to have the taxpayers pay for it when they're retired. Wow. That's what I plan on doing, because now I got my GI Bill back. So I'm going to find an expensive program when I'm in my 80s, and then I'll go to school. So I've got this is my new life, right? So there's pictures of me in a suit in the halls of Congress, in the White House, shaking hands with guys like John McCain. And guys that I served with and regular people see photos like that and make a lot of assumptions. So one guy that I served with, who was a brainiac, a very smart guy, like also like a Greek god, kind of like just a fucking beast, ended up being a sniper, going on a deployment that I didn't, came home really fucked up. And he had to be retired medically from the military. And he is still that, like, Superman, really smart fucking guy, wants to save the world, fight for his country, but he can't serve in uniform, can't be a cop. He's retired in his 30s. So he calls me up out of the blue. We had never had a discussion about this, and said, "Hey, I joined a neo-Nazi organization. I want you to help me take him down." That was it. That was the pitch. So long story short, at first I told him, no, that sounds fucking crazy. I'm a student. I'm running a nonprofit. I'm working full-time remotely. I can't pick up this crazy fucking project. A year later, I graduated and was immediately laid off, and I had nothing but time on my hands. So I said, all right, tell me about your Nazis. So that organization ended up being the Patriot Front, which I had never heard of before. Turns out they are the most active hate group in the United States. They're the modern day Klan, but they're Gen Z. they have an age limit. You have to be between 18 and 35, and it's not a moving bracket. It's ever younger people getting recruited into this organization. And Patriot Front is a rebranded Vanguard America. Vanguard America is the neo-Nazi group whose member ran into a crowd at the neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, killed Heather Heyer. This kid I think he's 23 now. Thomas Rousseau.
Yeah, I just went down the rabbit hole on this motherfucker.
Yeah. So this kid lives in Grapevine, Texas. He's been arrested, and Texas arrest records are public records. So
he looks almost exactly like you.
He's, he looks like a rhinestone cowboy, if you ask me.
Sorry.
I don't know that he can grow facial hair.
I think he has a beard. I thought he had like this really.
No.
I thought he grew this long beard. Anyway. Sorry, I was. There is a point to that, kind of why I made the joke though, because I don't know if you have this crazy beard to slide in or not, but the bottom line is white. You have to be a white guy, number one, and given your background, number two, you can, so go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. So most people see me from the chin up and they're like, why is that guy in a suit with that crazy fucking beard? Well, I'm covered in tattoos too. I look like a white supremacist. Yeah. So it's easy for me to blend into these organizations. Bald guy, beard, covered in tattoos, veteran background. Like them, I am fueled by fucking hatred and anger. It's just, I fucking hate Nazis. So, that's really the only difference is I fucking hate Nazis. They hate everybody. So it's like it was meant to be.
That's true. Yeah. So go ahead. So the Patriot Front group, Thomas Rousseau, this cat. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So this kid, he's before he stopped talking to the press, he used to say that he was radicalized by the Chans, meaning like 4chan and 8kun and the rest.
The dark web, these websites where people are,
So he was a kid, was in high school when Trump started running for president, was running, racist op-eds in his Texas high school newspaper, and was, quote, radicalized by the Chans. Next thing you know, he's calling himself the ground commander of Charlottesville. So he's therefore responsible for James Fields. He gave James Fields a fucking shield. He's wearing the same uniform as the guy. I don't know why he wasn't caught up in the Charlottesville lawsuit. But now, a few years later, he is directing hate crimes from his house in Grapevine, Texas. He's working with his members all around the country, modern day KKK, Gen Z, who conceal their faces because they know they're doing something wrong. And they go out and they vandalize Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ memorials, statues, paintings, and cover it with fascist propaganda. And this kid, what makes this organization unique is that when you join anonymously, and you're not supposed to give away any specific details that they could use to identify you. So whether it's online or in person, these members, even when they assemble and do their little, rhinestone cowboy march through DC, they ostensibly aren't supposed to know who is the person next to them wearing the white mask, which is just the modern day Klan hood. So that when people infiltrate the organization like I do, I'm only going to get like 5 or 6 guys who, have accidentally revealed themselves, trusting the bald white guy with tattoos. And, then it's up to me to impose social and economic costs on these guys if they haven't broken a law that they can get arrested for. You can be a hateful, bigoted asshole, but until you destroy your property or physically hurt someone, the cops aren't going to do anything. And it's not enough for me to document it and post it online. Cops aren't scouring Twitter, looking at what I'm saying on Twitter and going out and arresting people. I have to proactively reach out to the local police department, let them know it's worth their while to investigate this stuff, or else instead of going after Nazis, I'll go after the department saying that they are coddling the Nazis.
Have you done that?
Well, if anyone from the Washington State is in a police department, they might want to think about answering my emails.
Which PD is that? The Washington State Police? State Police?
It's Olympia. Olympia, Washington?
Well, I mean, one of the questions I want to ask you more about, the work and why you're doing it is, we can talk to you forever, man. But one of the main concerns that a lot of people are having is how much law enforcement and military have been infiltrated by these ideologies, that it's easy to shorthand and call Nazi because they're fascists, they're Nazis, they're white supremacists. I mean, I'm sure there are gradations and I'm sure there is different levels of seriousness, but if you're an NYPD officer and you're also a member of the Oath Keepers, or in this case, the Patriot Front, the public should know that, and there should be laws against that, I think, but maybe not. Maybe these are free speech things. Maybe you haven't committed a crime. I just don't know. I'm not sure how you go about it. But the problem seems to be that we're not talking about a few bad apples, that the concern of domestic terrorism, one with which you've taken up your career on now, is so far more than foreign terrorism and so much bigger of a problem because these are our neighbors, our friends, our family members, our community members. It is the issue of our time, and you're working on it. How concerned are you with there being extremists within the ranks of law enforcement and military member? How do you talk about that? How do you talk about the statistics there? It's a really tough thing to know. And there
are extremists in Congress. You look at Paul Gosar, representative from Arizona. He's the guy who most people know because he has 6 brothers and sisters who come out and said our brother is a racist piece of shit and he should not be in power. Right. Paul Gosar hangs out with Nick Fuentes, who's only famous because he dropped out of school because he was a participant in the neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville. Gosar is trying to rewrite the history of January 6th actively. He has taken Ashley Babbitt, the Air Force veteran who, was rightfully shot and killed by police when she tried to jump through a window into the speaker's lobby as part of a fucking riot, and made her into a hero. That's a member of Congress. Yes, extremist cops, that is really dangerous, but not to people like me. I'm a white guy with a beard. I don't get fucking pulled over when I'm driving in my pickup truck. But for people of color, it's real fucking dangerous to have those neo-Nazis on the street. But where it matters is if we lose our democracy, the Republicans who are rewriting the rules to steal elections legally next time, that's where we're really fucked. Yeah. Because then there's nobody who's going to be able to go after the racist neo-Nazi cop. Then they're going to be, promoted. Straight up encouraging that shit. Yeah. They're going to if Republicans take the House and the Senate, you think the Capitol Police aren't going to be purged of anyone who isn't pro-insurrectionist? That's very likely to happen.
What about
a year from now?
But what about currently? I know you're not dodging it. You're talking about you're prioritizing it. I mean, currently, National Guard, you Capitol Police, whoever it might be. Mm-hmm. When you're doing your job and then you contact the police department and they don't get back to you, that's an issue. And the truth is, we all know that if you were doing the same thing online with jihadists and you told them there's a guy over here I think you might want to take a look at, they'd send over 7 SWAT teams in tanks.
Well, if I was doing it with anti-fascists who only exist because we have fascists in our country, right? If I were writing dossiers about anti-fascist activists and handing them to the cops would go breaking in doors and killing people.
That's a great point.
Not exaggerating. That is literally what they do to people who they're like, oh, it's Antifa. Well, what does Antifa mean? Anti-fascist, right? So
someday I'll tell you about my big brother who was Antifa long before the word exists. You'll be inspired by my bro's story. He wrote some of the stuff I think that it might have inspired today's Antifa, as a matter of fact. But anyway,
awesome. Yeah. So what it is I have tremendous respect for these anonymous anti-fascists who have anonymous Twitter accounts. I reach out to them all the time. They are, for very good reason, they won't work with cops because they'll be targeted and their lives will be ruined. I can work with cops and I let them know, I'd like to take the information that you've made available to the public and I want to make sure that that neo-Nazi is not just fired from his job at McDonald's, but is held accountable, according to the legal system. Does it always work? Not right away.
You are getting results with your work?
Yeah. And, at the end of the day, one of the most powerful tools that we've had is doxing. Anti-fascists, anonymous folks will find out a person's address and they'll post it online. And the neo-Nazi who's, some 21-year-old fucking zit-faced punk kid gets scared and they stop. Well, now they're not stopping. Now they don't care if they get doxed anymore because they're meeting each other online and they're supporting each other, not just, with their propaganda and their hyperbole and their brainwashing, but like they're giving each other jobs. They're making sure that, well, if you get fired from your mechanic shop or whatever you're doing, I'll teach you to, use 3D printers or something like that. Right. So they're trying to, and this is a movement, right? The far right is trying to insulate themselves from the social and economic costs that are associated with being an actual neo-Nazi. What I am trying to do in the meantime, before they're able to build this, what they call parallel economy, is to impose all the social and economic costs that I can on my own as a private citizen, as someone who can try and encourage law enforcement to do the right thing, but is ultimately, I'm not going to break any fucking laws. I'm not going to jail for this shit, but I'll spend all my time trying to ruin these people's lives. Cause at the end of the day, my life's not threatened. I'm not going to lose a job over this shit, but a lot of people I care about are vulnerable to physical violence.
Yeah. No doubt about it. I mean, they come for those people, then they come for the next group, but eventually they come for someone that you care about and they love, and that's why you got to do your best to do what you're doing. It's amazing. But what's that phrase? Parallel economy. What's the theory?
Yeah,
they're going to support each other to create an economy and a job, way of life that white supremacists and fascists they can.
Yeah. So this is a very conscious thing. There's a guy named Andrew Torba. He's this, anti-Semitic piece of shit who built this alternative social media platform called Gab. All the Nazis got kicked off of PayPal. Well, he just built a new payment processing system.
Got it.
Right. The neo-Nazis keep getting, whether it's Steve Bannon, who promotes explicitly fascist shit and fascists on his, podcasts and radio show and websites and all that stuff.
I'm familiar with his work.
Like deplatforming them from Facebook, from Twitter, getting ad revenue cut down. Well, if Andrew Torba of Gab builds his own ad network full of fucking racist, anti-Semitic pieces of shit, well, you can't get them deplatformed anymore. So what my job as a veteran advocate, as someone who's walked the halls of Congress, who's passed laws, is not just to go one-on-one, head-to-head with these guys and harass them. It's to tell members of Congress, you have a limited time. Democrats are only in control of Congress for another year, very likely, just looking at history. If they don't address this neo-Nazi economy and the Republicans take over, they're going to be able to do incredible damage to the fabric of our society, let alone the threats of violence, not just against vulnerable groups, whether they're Jewish, people of color, LGBT, but individual members of Congress. Yeah. They're going to be facing real fucking organized violence that's organized openly online, because you can't get it taken offline because they're doing the shit on their own servers.
Wow.
Yeah. So I know I'm a bit of a bummer, but
not at all. No, I mean, it's a bummer hearing the landscape, knowing what is definitely scary and depressing. And I'm trying to have a conversation with people as real as I can about the threats that we're facing without, scaring anybody. And, the first time I saw you were on MSNBC for a minute and a half. I'm like, this dude has a story to tell and work that he's doing. And so I think that this format, allows someone like you to say, here's who I am. Here's how I arrived at the work I'm doing. Here's why I'm doing it. And hopefully people listening, it gives them hope and an understanding to know that there are people like you doing what you are doing, and hopefully they'll support your work because it's a nonprofit as well. So,
Sparvarius is not. Sparvarius is a for-profit endeavor. This work is too fucking dangerous to not get paid for it. So,
forgive me. I mean, well, you get paid a nonprofit too, but regardless, supporting your mission. So it's a veteran-owned, open source intelligence firm. So we need. I mean, what could be better than that angle that you're taking on it? And it is, obviously it's different from, as you said, ADL, et cetera. So, and working in conjunction with them. So I'm excited to learn about your work and to support your work and to give, exposure to it so that people know that you're out there doing it. So no, I will not let it be a downer. It's inspirational to know that you're out there doing what you're doing and that you're such a badass doing it, because that's, we got to have people like you doing this type of work. And
well, my whole goal is, I'm writing a book, it's going to cover everything that we talked about, like kind of like my origin story. We didn't even talk about like how I almost went down the fucking radicalization path, like watching conspiracy theory videos because I was fucking jobless, living in my mom's house, all sorts of right. So I'm going to write about all that in a book. Hopefully give people a better understanding. I'm not asking people to be empathetic for neo-Nazis and members of militias. In fact, I want them to hate them because hate is powerful and it motivates people. At least it motivates me. And I'm hoping to basically write an instruction manual, like how to be an anti-fascist, how anyone can, take their skill set, their interests, their time, their money, and fight for democracy. I'm not going to tell you like, oh, go donate $7 to the fucking Democrats. Like that money is not going to go anywhere. But if you donate money to the ADL, to the SPLC, if you want to send me money on fucking Twitter or some shit, fund my way of life, I'm going to hire more veterans so that we can go hunt Nazis together. So, yeah.
Nazi hunter Kristofer Goldsmith, an honor to have you joining me, and really appreciate you being so vulnerable and honest and giving me so much of your time. I look forward to talking to you about it again. So thank you very much.
Thanks, brother. Anytime.
Wow, what did you think of that? Love to know what you think of that guy. Intense, huh? I don't know. I was conflicted with some of the ways that he talked and worried about some of the tactics, but at the same time, I was happy that he was doing it, I mean, I hate to hear someone talk about how much they hate others, but I mean, hating Nazis seems pretty fair. So anyway, well, I hope you enjoyed that. And yes, I guess send him some money. At Kris Goldsmith 85 is his Twitter handle. Learn more about him and his work and his organization's work in the show notes for today's show, as well as everything else that you might want to know. Find the link to tonight's hangout in there as well. If you're a subscriber, you can join us. I hope to see you. I definitely think we need this one tonight. And we will talk then. How about that? I hope John Carroll's there. He's taking us out right now. Bye-bye.
Stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to to the voice inside and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run